let's talk about 1 year of war in Gaza. For Palestinians, it's been 12 months of unprecedented loss and suffering.
Living here in Gaza feels like being trapped in a never-ending cycle of trauma.
والله صعيد لقيت حالي كله واضح ما انا عارفه اتنفس.
حتى امها ماتت. مين بده يرجعها؟
Everything you hear or see about Gaza is just the tip of the iceberg. No photo or video can convey the smell of death, the sound of 24/7 drones, the uncertainty of whether you or your family will make it through another day hangs over every moment of each day.
The number of journalists killed, the number of medical workers killed, the number of schools destroyed, the percentage of amputated children. This is the worst war in modern history.
A lot has happened since October 7th, 2023. So I'm going to run you through some of the main updates on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, what's going on with the Israeli captives, what's going on with Hamas, and where things are at with the ceasefire. Let's start with the human cost in Gaza. Remember, we're talking about a tiny strip of land densely packed with more than 2 million people who can't leave, where Israel has dropped thousands of bombs. More than 40,000 people have been killed, according to Gaza's health ministry. It recently published this list, naming more than 30,000 of the dead. It's 649 pages long. The first 13 pages are all babies under 1. It's not until page 215 that you see the name of an adult.
This year has been a relentless cycle of loss of loved ones, loss of homes, and loss of livelihoods.
أرجو أن تستفيقوا وأن توقفوا هذه الإبادة المتلفزة.
Right now, the UN's highest court is deciding whether Israel's actions in Gaza amount to genocide, an accusation Israel rejects. Gaza has been devastated by Israel's bombing. By May 2024, more than half of all of Gaza's buildings had been damaged or destroyed, according to the UN. It's not just thousands of residential buildings, but also roads, farmland, mosques, churches, hospitals, universities, and schools.
The landscape is totally decimated and destroyed.
Nearly everyone in Gaza, 90% of the population, has been forced to leave their home. Many people have had to pack up and move over and over again, and are living in bombed-out buildings, tents, and out in the streets.
نزحت من غزة لخان يونس، من خان يونس لحمد، من حمد للجمهور 20 مرة. بعدنا وفقدنا كتير.
المرة السابعة ما ضلش خلص حلونا بكفي.
انا بدي اعرف واحد يطلع اعلام يقول لي وين الناس تروح، عن جد وين الناس تروح.
The Israeli military has issued dozens of evacuation orders, telling civilians to go to so-called safe zones, while it says it goes after Hamas fighters. But even those zones are coming under fire. Humanitarian agencies say nowhere in Gaza is safe.
Daylight gives you a sense of the power that came from the air. Israel says it targeted various Hamas field commanders. But what that means is that Israel targeted a camp for the internally displaced. Their tarpaulin tents no protection against Israel's military might. Israel deemed this a safe zone.
That was in Al-Mawasi in September. At least 19 people were killed.
Times and times again, we have seen Israel justifying massacres in order to pursue the alleged killing of a militant. But by this token, Israel is given license to kill everyone in Gaza by simply claiming that it was to kill a Hamas combatant. This is indecent. I mean, it's beyond unlawful.
So what's happening with aid delivery? Remember, at the start of the war, Israel imposed a complete siege on Gaza.
אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק.
הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
Israel has been accused of using starvation as a weapon of war, including by the UN's Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food. In a report to the UN General Assembly, he said Israel made its intentions to starve everyone in Gaza explicit. Then, Israel used starvation to induce forcible transfer, harm, and death against people in the north, pushing people into the south, only to starve, bombard, and kill people in newly created refugee camps in the south. Around 500,000 people are facing catastrophic levels of food insecurity. In other words, they're facing famine. In August, an average of just 69 aid trucks entered Gaza per day, which is a record low. Aid groups say Israel is blocking 83% of the required food aid from reaching Gaza. On top of all of that, disease is spreading because there's not enough clean water.
The lack of clean water has led to 1.7 million cases of infection diseases that can trigger massive and deadly epidemics, making water scarcity and contamination a silent bomb which has far less visibility than those that destroy buildings, but are no less lethal bomb.
The risk of disease is coupled with a desperate lack of medical care. Doctors Without Borders says Gaza's healthcare system is being methodically dismantled through Israeli attacks, the blocking of aid, and the lack of protection for medical staff. Before the war, Gaza had 36 hospitals. Now, just 17 are partially functioning, according to the UN.
It does feel like people are waiting for death. Death seems to be the only certainty in this situation, in all of this uncertainty. And that's a really horrific reality for people to have on the ground here.
Now, for Israelis, one of the biggest concerns since Hamas's attack in October last year, when more than 1,000 people were killed, has been the fate of the captives. 251 Israelis and foreigners were taken by Hamas and other groups into Gaza. 117 have got out alive through a prisoner swap, Israeli army operations, or because Hamas released them. The bodies of 37 captives have been recovered and returned to Israel. Some of them were killed by Israeli forces, according to various reports. In August, Israeli soldiers located the bodies of 6 captives in a Hamas tunnel. Israel accused Hamas of killing them. Hamas said it held Israel responsible because it had refused to sign a ceasefire deal. 97 captives remain unaccounted for.
אני חושב עליהם כל הזמן, על המשפחות שלהם, על הסבל שלהם, ולכן הלכנו כברת דרך ארוכה כדי להחזיר אותם. אבל תוך כדי הפעולה הזאת, אנחנו שמרנו על מטרות המלחמה, בראשן חיסול החמאס.
For months, there have been protests in Israel, led by some of the captives' families, calling on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire that would save their loved ones. The incident in August, when 6 captives were found dead, triggered the biggest protest so far.
לא מעניין אותו כלום, מעניין אותו נתניהו, זה מעניין אותו להישאר בשלטון.
The life of more than 100 Israelis, men, women, young girls, their life are not the first priority of the Israeli government. This is something that makes you think, where are they taking us? Where are they taking the Israeli people, Jews and Arabs?
Despite the big street protests, Netanyahu looks pretty secure politically. A poll in May showed that 39% of Israelis thought the government's military response against Hamas in Gaza had been about right, and 34% thought it had not gone far enough. Okay, so what about Hamas? Israel has always said the aim of its war is to eliminate the group. 12 months on, that hasn't happened. Israel has said that it's killed a senior Hamas commander, Mohammed Deif, in July, although Hamas says he's still alive. And then Hamas's political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, was assassinated in Iran. Most people think Israel was behind it. Hamas's military leader, Yahya Sinwar, has replaced Haniyeh. Sinwar is thought to be in Gaza. Now, when it comes to Hamas's fighting capability, we don't have exact numbers on things like ammunition or the number of fighters they've lost. Before the war, Israeli officials estimated that Hamas had around 30,000 fighters. Recently, the Israeli army said it had killed 17,000 fighters, but gave no details about how it arrived at that number. Hamas itself hasn't released any figures, but says it's still got the capacity to keep up the fight.
حجم الإصابات الذي يقع في المقاومة هو أقل بكثير مما هو متوقع في معركة بهذا الحجم وبهذا المستوى وبهذا الاتساع، وقدرة المقاومة على الاستمرار هي قدرة عالية.
We don't really know the details of what condition Hamas is in. They've been very good at hiding their abilities or the damage done to them. But clearly Hamas has been damaged. I mean, you can't sustain a year of the most intense aerial bombing in modern history and come out totally intact. But they're still fighting, they're still carrying out operations in Gaza.
So where do things stand with the ceasefire deal? Remember, Israel and Hamas aren't speaking directly to each other. The US, along with mediators from Qatar and Egypt, are driving the negotiations. In late May, US President Joe Biden presented a three-stage ceasefire plan. It involved Israeli forces withdrawing from Gaza and all the captives eventually being released in exchange for Palestinian prisoners held by Israel, and a final stage, ending the war and reconstructing Gaza. At the time, Hamas said they'd go for it if Israel did. But Netanyahu said he wouldn't sign up to a deal that included a permanent end to the war. Since then, there have been more negotiations, and another obstacle has emerged.
This is the Philadelphia corridor.
Netanyahu started insisting that Israeli troops should remain in a strip of land along Gaza's southern border with Egypt, known as the Philadelphia corridor, which Hamas is against. All this makes the prospect of a ceasefire anytime soon look increasingly slim. In early September, the US Secretary of State said a deal was 90% there. But a recent report in the Wall Street Journal quotes US officials saying they no longer believe a deal is likely before the end of Joe Biden's presidency in January. And now the backdrop is even more fraught with what's going on in Lebanon, and the escalation in the fight between Israel and Hezbollah, which is an ally of Hamas. Israel's bombing campaign and ground offensive in Lebanon has displaced 1 million Lebanese people, about a fifth of the population. More than 2,000 people have been killed, including hundreds of women and children, and several Hezbollah commanders.
Okay, I need to bring you some breaking news. The Israeli army has officially announced that it has killed the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah.
This is probably the most significant point that we could say represents a very likelihood or high likelihood of a major escalation. And I think that unfortunately that means we're in a likely scenario of an even worse level of warfare and escalation than we've even seen over the last almost 12 months since October 7th.
So 1 year into the Gaza war, the outlook is really, really bleak. And unless something big changes, it's hard to see where the answers are going to come from.
People need to know that Gaza is more than just a war zone. It is home to over 2 million people trying to survive amid unbearable conditions. We are resilient, but we're not superheroes, and we need the world's help to end this suffering.
One of the big features of this war has been the role of international law. We've explained how it works and why some people feel the whole system is failing the people of Gaza and elsewhere. You can watch our recent explainer here.